to another video from Q7of Solutions. We're helping you go through the mathematics assignment questions by showing you exactly how to get those answers. This is for the British International Distance College Maths module. Visit our website for more information and content and resources to help you. Consider following us on Instagram and Twitter, and if you need to contact us, you can DM us or tweet us, and keep watching the YouTube channel for more supports. So far, we've covered the first 6 questions of assignment number 2. We are now going to be looking at question number 7, so let's begin. Question 7 is broken up into different parts. At the beginning of the question, they state, the length y of a solid is inversely proportional to the square of its height. This was for a solid. Then point number A says write down a general equation for x and y. Show that when x equals 5 and y equals 4.8, the equation becomes x squared y equals 120. That's what they want us to do for A. If we look further, we've got a few other considerations where you've been given different values for y, which you need to substitute. Then they also say we need to describe exactly what happens when y is doubled. We need to describe exactly what happens when when y is decreased by 36%, and make the subject of the equation make x the subject of the equation. Great. So we've got a few different sections here as part of the one question. Let's write down the most important bits and pieces that we require in order to do this calculation. Firstly, I'm going to have to write down what was given in the question. So they tell me the length y of a solid is inversely proportional to the square of its height. So we've obviously got height, and we've got length. So they've stated the length y of a solid is inversely proportional. If something is inversely proportional, means it's not directly proportional. Directly proportional means if it increases, it would increase. Here it's inversely proportional, meaning it's not direct. It would be changing in the opposite direction to the square of its height x. So now we can put x here, and obviously we're squaring x, so we would have x squared. Then they say write down a general equation for x and y. So to answer question A, they want a general equation for x and y. They tell us the length y is inversely proportional to the square of its height. So we're looking at inversely proportional, meaning it isn't the same as. It's inversely proportional, not directly proportional. So it would be decreasing, not increasing. And they tell us that the length of the solid is inversely proportional to the square of its height x. So then I've got x squared. And that's what I've got here, because I'm looking for those two terms. If the length had to increase by, let's say, 1, it's not directly proportional, because x wouldn't increase by 1 or decrease by 1. It's literally squared. So x would be squared and y would just remain as is. So the length of y of a solid is inversely proportional to the square of its height x. Write down a general equation for x and y. Then they say show that when x equals 5 and y equals 4.8, the equation becomes x squared y equals 120. So the first step is to get the general equation. So let's consider what we've just read. We read that y is inversely proportional to x squared. Let's first understand what inverse means. Well, if I have x, the inverse of x would be 1 over x. So here they said y is inversely proportional to x squared. So therefore y would equal 1 over x squared. That would be the equation, the general equation, and that's what they've asked you for. They said write down a general equation for x and y. So the general equation would be y equals 1 over x squared. Then they say show that when x5 and y equals 4.8, the equation becomes x squared y equals 120. Well, that's easy. They tell us that if x is 5, so I'm going to put a 5 here, 5 squared, which is 25, and then they say that's equal to y, which is 4.8. Okay, and that's the y value for that particular sum. You'll see, obviously, I need to make this the subject of the equation in terms of y and x on one side. So I'm going to have x squared here times y equal to 0. So looking at that, you've got an expression with x's and y's. They tell us that if I have y 4.8, I'm going to substitute that into there. And then I've got x which is 5. So the 1 over x squared would obviously be 1 over 25, which I could just substitute into this, which I'm going to do. So 25 times 4.8 equals, let's have a look, 25 times 4.8 equals 120. So therefore, if I had to substitute 5 into x, and if I had to substitute 4.8 into x, 5 squared is 25, and therefore 25 times 4.8 gives you 120. So they said show when x and y equal those values, the equation becomes x squared y equals 120, which is what we had here. X squared y equals 120. That was question number A. Let's now have a look at 7b. 7b states, find y when x equals 2. So I've got the general equation y equals 1 over x squared, because they tell us it's inversely proportional to the square of its height. Then they say in point number B, find y when x equals 2. So all I need to do is substitute a 2 into the denominator for x, and I'm going to have that. So I'm going to have y equals 1 over 2 squared is 4. Let's have a look at 7c. 7c states, find x when y equals 10. So y equals 1 over x squared. If y is going to equal 10, then I'm going to have 10 equal to x squared, 1 over x squared. Can I take the x squared across? Yes, I can. So that'll go to the left, becoming x squared. The 10 can go to the right, becomes 1 over 10. So then I can square root. So I'll square root that x squared equals square root the 1 over 10. So if I'm square rooting x squared, I'm going to get x. And if I square root 1 over 10, that's going to give us an answer. Two numbers times together to give you a tenth. Let's check that on our calculator. So the calculator gives me square root a tenth as 0.31622 ... Okay, recurring decimals. And that would be the answer for question C. Let's have a look at the next one. 7D says, find x when y equals x. So we've got y equals 1 over x squared. That's the equation. Then they say find x when y is x. So then I'll have x here equal to 1 over x squared. Then I'll have x times x squared equals 1. So I'll have x to the 3 equals 1. if x is to the power 3, I'm then going to cube root it. So I'll have cube root and cube root that. So then cube root x would give me x, cube root y would give me, cube root 1 would give me 1. So x would equal 1 here for 7D. X equals 1 would be the answer. The next question is 7E. 7E states, describe exactly what happens to y when x is doubled. They want you to describe. So I'm writing down the equation y equals 1 over x squared. They're saying, describe exactly what happens to y when x is doubled. So we're describing it. So I'm going to choose an x value, and then I'm going to double it and see what we get. So let's start with y equals 1 over x squared. I'm going to assume 2 here, or let's use a bigger number. Let's use 3. So y equals 1 over 3 squared, which is 1 over 9. Then they said, what happens if we double the x? So if I double the x, I'm going to have y equals 1 over x squared, and I'm doubling my x, so this figure is going to go, sorry, wrong color. That figure is going to go up. That's going to be doubled. So doubled means times 2. So then I'm going to have y equals 1 over 3 doubled. 3 times 2 is 6. So I'll have 6 squared here, which is 1 over 6 squared is 36. So we can see that we now have 1 over 9, and we now have 1 over 36. So if I'm focusing on the actual equation, what I could say is, if I'm doubling x, what I ultimately am doing is this. I'm going to have 1 over bracket 2x squared. So if that's the case, I'm actually multiplying out. So I'll have y equals 1 over 4x squared. So when focusing on, they said describe, you could probably describe this as in terms of a quarter. So you're including a quarter in this actual equation because it's 1 over 4 times x squared. So as we could see here, if I've got 1 over 9, to get to 1 over 36, I'd have to times the 9 by 4 because I'm missing that amount here in the denominator because I've now doubled the actual value for x, because x is doubled. Doubled means times by 2. And that would be the answer for question number E. You're describing it. So that's what they said. Describe exactly what happens to y when x is doubled. (7F) says, describe exactly what happens to x when y is decreased by 36%. Describe exactly what happens to x when y is decreased. So now y is going to be decreasing. So we write down the equation. Then they said y is decreasing by how much? 36%. So we're going to have y minus bracket y times 36% equals 1 over x squared. Then I'm going to obviously multiply out. So I'm going to have y minus 0.36y equals 1 over x squared. This gives me 0.64 y equals 1 over x squared. They said describe exactly what happens to x when y is decreased by 0.6%. So they want to know what happens to x. I'm going to move x to the right, so x squared equals 1 over 0.64 y. That's what you're going to insert. They said describe exactly what happens. So again, I'm going to choose points to insert here. So let's choose an x of, let's use different colors just to show this. I'm going to say when x equals, let's use 3 again. Right, so when x equals 3, they're going to, it's going to affect what happens to x when y is decreased by 36%. Describe exactly what happens to x. Right, I should actually choose y's, not x here, because they actually asked you for the change in the other variable, not this one. So I should actually say, let's just read the question again. Question 7F says, describe exactly what happens to x when y is decreased. Okay, so I'm looking for x when y is decreased. I could actually take this one step further before I do the substitution. Obviously, I've got x squared here equal to that. If I root this, I would root that. So I would therefore have x equal to root 1 over 0.64 y. And then I'm doing the test. So this test up here is looking at substituting in a y. So I'm going to put a y into that equation to see what x is. Then x is equal to what? Let's check. So I'm going to have to type that into my calculator. It's the square root of 1 over 0.64 times y, which I said was 3. I'm getting 0,72168 and that's when y equals 3. Then they said describe exactly what happens to x when y is decreased by 36%. So this y that I have here is going to be decreasing by 36%, minus 0.36, okay, of 3, less 36%. So 3 times 0.36 is 1.08. So then I'm going to say when y equals, what is it now? Well, it'll be 3 minus 1.08. So 3 minus that answer gives me 1.92. 1.92. So that means I've decreased the 3 by 36%, and that's going to give me 1.92. If I substitute 1.92 into that equation for y, let's see what we get. Square root, I've got 1 divided by, we've got 0.64 times y, which is 1.92. And my answer comes out to x equals 0.9021 ... So looking at this, we can see that x has increased. So the question said describe exactly what happens to x when y is decreased by 36%. Well, if y is decreasing by 36%, x will increase, because we've got here 0.72 and we've got this 0.90. So we can see that the x values are increasing. Then we have one more question for number 7. 7 was long, there were a few different parts. 7G says, make x the subject of the formula, and they've given you x squared y equals 120. So let's write that down. X squared y equals 120. And they said make x the subject of the formula. So we're making x the subject. So x squared is going to equal 120 over y. Then I'm going to square root. So x squared. If I square root the left, I'm going to square root the right. So x would equal square root 120 over y. And obviously if you look at restrictions here, y would have to be greater than 0. You can't divide by a negative number. And you could also have a plus minus here because it's a square root. So for example, square root 4 would be plus minus 2, because if I square plus 2, I get 4. If I square minus 2, I also get 4. So there's a plus minus here. So I would show that in as well, plus minus the root of 120 over y. They said make x the subject of the formula. So if I'm making x the subject of the formula, it's going to be plus minus root 120 over y. That'll be an equation that represents x. That concludes this video. Thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing to the channel, and if you like the video, please hit the thumbs up button, and we'll keep creating more content to help you.